Welcome to the Cannabis Detector Podcast. No sugar, all spice. With the industry BS detector in residence, Kristen Yoder. This episode is part of a special series covering the financial aspects of the cannabis industry.
Hello, my Cannabis detectors, and welcome back to a special episode with Colby McFadden from Quiver Financial on the All Things Green series. And today we are covering inclusivity in the cannabis industry. What does that mean? Is it going to occur? Is it occurring now? We'll talk about our thoughts. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited. This is a great subject that a lot of good people are passionate about. So it's definitely needs to be talked about.
Yeah, when you first brought up inclusion, I thought you were talking about social equity, which is a sort of like an inclusion, but this is a little bit different because this is talking about the big and the little guys, and will the little guys get wiped out? And this is a huge, this is one of the biggest hills I'll die on, is fighting for the people that were here before the wealthy people came in and took over. So I think this is an excellent topic to talk about today.
Yeah, and they really have crossroads. You know, there's some people who are focused purely on social equity, which is a subject matter that needs to be focused on. And there's some people that just are talking about, hey, how do we have inclusion and access to the industry as things get more restrictive and regulated and expensive to play? And in my mind, there's really a crossroads where they do intersect because they're both important and they both affect all people of all races and colors. So it's something that I don't think should be looked at as just one or the other, because I think both camps need to work synergistically in helping each other out.
Oh, definitely. Well, I think social equity is just part of inclusion. I mean, these are the people, as far as social equity, for people that don't know what that is, it's a push to right the drug war wrongs of having people that were essentially put in jail for making money selling cannabis, when now they're still in jail, or they have felonies that have ruined their lives and have really gotten in the way of their quality of life. And yet now, when it's legal and safe, there are politicians and other people getting into it. And social equity is about paving a way forward for people that have had their lives ruined by the drug war, to be able to benefit from selling cannabis or being a part of the cannabis industry.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's story after story of very talented, good people who have a drug felony that now can't enter into the industry because of that. And under current rules and laws, they wouldn't have received that drug felony. So, you know, how do we right those wrongs, and how do we create an even playing field for all people? And a lot of times everybody thinks that federal legalization is going to solve all those problems. But if it's not thought of ahead of time, you could actually exacerbate the problem with federal legalization. And so I think it has to be really thoughtful when we move towards that legalization conversation.
So that's basically what we're going to talk about today is where do we go? What happens when there's national legalization? How do we make inclusion something that is valued and taken care of when the people making the laws are generally the lobbyists and the people with money that buy the politicians? And these just in California alone, the regulations are only working in the favor of people that have the money to deal with this, or have the infrastructure or the experience in dealing with an overly regulated industry. So when we get to a national level, I think it'll be much less inclusive than it is now, because it's hardly inclusive in California, at least. And in a lot of states, actually, it's really legalization just puts up a bunch of barriers. It doesn't knock down doors, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, you as a wealth advisor and someone who works with investors and investing in these companies, you see a side that I don't really get to see. and you've been expressing your concerns as well. So what are some of your concerns that you're seeing?
Well, I think it's the obvious ones are right there, which is with the cost of entry and the barriers to entry, it favors deeper, bigger pockets, which eventually leads to bankers like myself and middle-aged white guys running the business. And I'm going to have a lot of colleagues in my industry not necessarily liking my viewpoint of not wanting too many middle-aged white guys running the show. But that's what happens in business when people see that there's these great opportunities. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, it's not always the first mouse that gets the cheese. And this might be one of those industries that really shows that, because post legalization, how does inclusion look? When you create a level playing field out there, and you take away some of the barriers to entry or the dislocations that we have now, because everything's state by state, I think you actually make the inclusion problem worse. So I think a lot of the solution has to come from both the industry and the banking side, which some of that is happening. There's some very good people out there that are starting funds, that are in the incubation part of the business, where they want to incubate brands and accelerate brands that have this as part of their mandate. That have this conversation as part of their thesis of, hey, when we're investing, we're looking for opportunities and entrepreneurs that will carry this message and create access to the industry. And so I do see the foundational workings of an industry that is saying, hey, we need to create this for the health of the industry. My fear a lot of times is, okay, is it all lip service? Because it's great to say all these things and do all these things, but can we really fight against that natural tide that's just going to happen the moment that you open up the New York Stock Exchange?
I think that's an interesting point. Is there are all of these cannabis lobbying groups, the NCIA and all of these other people that are supposedly lobbying on behalf of the cannabis industry, but the cannabis industry is already being taken over by middle-aged, wealthy white males. And it sounds like you're saying that the people that would be able to make it more inclusive are the middle-aged white guys with funds. If they make it their mission to support with their money the brands that are more about the culture, and the little guy, maybe craft cannabis or something like that, to resist the urge to just go with the larger corporations. But I don't even know if our own industry's lobbying groups are going to work in the favor of all the little people that they're supposed to be working in the favor of. Not that they're not working in the favor. I just think that there are consequences to legalization and getting things passed that aren't really being discussed, because people are more interested in getting legal access across the country. Which someone made a comment on LinkedIn that was like, I'm so tired of hearing everybody talk about cannabis business and the little guy and the big guy. Like, we just want to stop going to jail for it. We just want access in the first place. And I don't even know if national legalization will give access to everyone in the country, because I can only imagine there's going to be a ton of states that are going to fight this, especially in the South, where they wouldn't even consider it in the first place. So there are ramifications of our lobbying efforts, and I don't know if national legalization is going to solve everything, but I don't think that their main fight it includes inclusivity. I don't think that's one of the things on their list. Their thing is legalization.
Yeah. And I'll go backwards to go forwards, because I think, to recap what we were talking about and lead into this is that it only takes one. I'm a big believer, and I'm really optimistic that it only takes one powerful voice. It only takes one media presence to shape a new perspective. And I believe those voices exist because I've been in meetings and I've sat with some very good people that are in the process of raising money that really do want to get behind and are behind these messages. So I do think if there is an industry out there that has the potential to right the wrongs and focus on inclusion, it is the cannabis industry. As long as people like you and I encourage others to step up and continue to be voices for that. It has to be a constant beating of the drum. And then also looking for opportunities that create solutions to those problems. So leading into the legalization conversation is I'm not so optimistic on that side, because in my mind, when I look forward as an investor and I think to myself, what happens, and this is something I've been running through my mind a lot, is what happens to the investment environment and to the industry and all these things when there's a change in legalization or a rescheduling. What takes place? What happens to investors that have invested in cultivation, that have invested in distribution, which are probably the two areas that get affected the most? Because even though each state has the right to set their rules, just like in the alcohol industry, you can have dry counties or you can have a dry state, or you have a state like Utah who says, hey, no selling on Sunday. So the constituents of those municipalities can make the rules or vote for the rules that fit best for their culture. But at the end of the day, what you end up doing is you create this even playing field on a federal level, all right? And so you then end up benefiting the large, because at the end of the day, that's what the Philip Morris's or the Altrias and the British Tobaccos and all the large institutional businesses, the S&P 500 companies, from beverages to consumer goods, that's when they enter in, right? And that's when cost of production really matters. And I always look at this and think to myself, well, what the hell happens to the investor who just dumped a bunch of money into a grow facility in Coachella Valley at the price of real estate in California and electricity and labor costs? How do they compete with the producer in Nebraska or Kansas? And we've seen this post the Farm Bill. Everybody was so excited for CBD and hemp to be legalized, but be careful what you ask for, because the moment that legalization happened, all of a sudden people's merchant accounts are shut down, and then people start to realize, oh boy, cost of production matters, and the guys in other states have an advantage, and investors are not seeing the returns that they were promised. So I just think that for investors, you got to be real careful when you're at this stage that it looks like legalization or rescheduling of some sort happens in the U.S. in, let's say, a year or two, because the old tricks won't work anymore.
Yeah, so speaking of tricks, we were talking about this and you had brought up the RTOs in Canada. Mm-hmm. What do you think the difference will be? If it's already nationally legalized, then why would they have to do that in the first place, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if I were a Canaccord or a banker up there, I would be wanting to cool my heels on the whole process of do a private raise in Canada, buy an asset in the U.S., and take it public up in Canada. What they've termed RTOs, because I would imagine if you think that, hey, there could be a change in legalization within a short period of time, a year or two, which is typically the time frame you need to do a capital raise and structure it and get it out to market. I would think up in Canada, they're thinking to themselves, well, do we want to keep doing these things, or should we invest more in private deals, roll up as many, they're seeing what's going on, and they would say, hey, maybe let's do as many private raises as we can, go down to the U.S., pick up distressed assets, back to the first mouse doesn't get all the cheese. Let's find the people that have ran out of money and roll these things up and take them public in the U.S. when legalization changes. So, if the viewpoint is that some legalization on a federal level could change within 24 months, I highly doubt bankers up in Canada are going to put a lot of time and effort into the old process of doing things.
Well, it's kind of like Canopy has a deal with buying acreage, and acreage is buying everyone all over the place, building up their fund, but only when national legalization occurs.
Sure.
So they're already planning on this. And that's going to be a huge change too. And you had also mentioned something interesting about the data that all of these companies are getting. And as we all know, data is king. I mean, look at, what was that? Britannica, Analytical Britannica or whatever, I forget the name, but all that data helped win the elections by really playing on people's emotions and getting information. And now we have the tech sector and the cannabis industry is huge. That's one of the ancillary sectors that gets a lot of investment, and they're all going after data. And it's interesting because what are they going to do with that data? And we had gotten into that conversation because we were talking about Phylos bioscience and how, for the people that don't know, there was a video of Mowgli Holmes, the head of Phylos bioscience, doing a pitch basically saying that they're going to be, I mean, they didn't say the next Monsanto, but they're essentially shooting to get into genetics and breeding. And what they did is they had all these growers submit all their data, all their DNA information on their plants. And now everyone is revolting against Phylos. I mean, Mowgli hasn't even been showing up to any events or anything because the blowback is insane. And it's like, well, what about all of these apps that are collecting grower data and other things? Who will benefit from that in the future?
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of the solutions to some of the problems that we talk about and are seeing are in the sciences, and data is now a science, right? Data
Definitely.
and data collection is a science, and so I do feel that as the industry grows, there'll be a lot more data to help guide future parts of the industry and make smarter decisions for individuals. But I also think it becomes important for entrepreneurs to guard their data with incredible foresight on it, in the sense that placing information in apps that collect the data. It's just like Facebook or Google. When you hit accept and you do accept those the terms of agreements, they're going to do anything with your data that they can. So while there again, I do think there's some solutions to these problems in the world of data, I think people need to be very careful about what they volunteer and realize their data becomes very valuable. And things that people would are not paying attention to or throwing away are probably worth a lot more than in the past.
Oh, definitely. I did a podcast episode a few years back with my ex-business partner about comparing CPG retail strategies versus cannabis product retail strategies. And just the grocery store is such... there's all kinds of strategies out there. There's no bud tender to tell you what meat to buy or whatever like that. It's not like that at all. You go in there and all you have is shelf space and packaging colors and the end caps, and they use different tiles for getting you to slow down. They have music that affects you. So the data that they're collecting is incredibly valuable to these companies. And bringing that back to cannabis, any app that a grower uses to track everything that he's doing, and hundreds of thousands of growers that utilize the same app, there's no protection that Altria or Monsanto or something they don't exist. Bayer doesn't go in and buy the data company, and then they have all of this data. And I don't know anybody that reads the big terms and conditions of anything that you use, really. You just download it and start using it because it's very helpful. But in the end, these are things that can be held they can work against you in the future that I didn't even think of this until we were talking about it. There's so much big money that's just waiting to buy up the industry, and data is an excellent way to get in and get all of the information that people have been working on and all the ways that they grow and everything like that to basically be bought and used by a massive corporation.
Yeah, right now in the cannabis industry, data and education are fragmented. They're not together yet. And what I mean by that is, take a dispensary, for example. They may collect data, and there are software companies and that through point of sale are very good at collecting the data from the dispensary. But to date, I really haven't seen a dispensary chain take that data and then turn it into training for their employees to make the sales process better. Now that could be happening and I'm just not aware of it, but I've looked at quite, in some of the roles that I play in other companies that are education based. I'm just finding that the industry is running around saying, yes, we need to combine data and education and we need to educate our employees, but we're just too damn busy to do it.
It's funny because we are continually trying to reinvent the wheel when we don't need to. Cannabis is just a plant. I mean, true, it has a medical use and a recreational use and all kinds of uses, but it's still an agricultural commodity, and retail sales are retail sales. These are just things that we don't have to come up with yet. Everything seems to be so early in the industry, and I don't necessarily understand why, but that's like a whole other tangent. But I mean, it's interesting to see where are we going, and what about the small? So you were saying the early companies that get in. I was saying when California first passed Prop 64 that people should wait a couple of years before they start up a business, because in a couple of years, having to deal with all the regulation changes and all of these different issues that are going to cost a ton of money, they're going to get wiped out by year 2. And then some company is going to come in and pay them pennies on the dollar because there is no bankruptcy in the cannabis industry, and just consolidate everyone. I wonder if it's, what do you think? Should people wait to get in, or do you think that they should go for it before it's nationally legalized?
So I think as an investor, you have to segment the market, right? You have to look at the market you're looking to put your hard-earned money into, or other people's hard-earned money, however you may be doing it. And you have to look at the segments and say, okay, I've got to do my due diligence and my analysis completely different on something that touches the plant, like distribution or cultivation, because legalization means something completely different to those investors than somebody who's invested in an ancillary business like media or nutrients, or something of where their legalization is going to either put a tailwind to certain businesses or a headwind on others, and that you have to be honest and step back. And I think a lot of people who are going into that, the last couple of years, if you wanted to raise money, and we kind of joke in the money raising business that it's easier to sell the sizzle. So in the last 2 years, it's been a lot easier to get somebody to write a check for cultivation or distribution, because that's where everybody thought, oh man, when legalization happens, we're going to make that'll make a fortune, right? That was a lot of a lot of what I heard. And now, as you go forward, you have to really question that thesis and say, really? You really think so? Is that really going to happen? Because you got to look at other industries, and when they get big, who dominates? And it's usually he who has the most money. So I think you have to look at the industry and look at each segment. And I really think for most investors, most answers are going to find where the best place to park. And even for people looking for inclusion and social equity, probably one of the biggest areas that we find a lot of these answers is in the medical sciences. I think at the end of the day, what has been legitimizing and what does legitimize and reframe the old stigma of cannabis is the medical sciences. Because when you start having UCLA and UCI and you have medical doctors and researchers coming out talking about efficacy, that changes people's mindsets. When you have people who have been taking, I talked with somebody recently that was having sciatic pain, and I said, well, what are you taking? They said, well, I'm taking, an opioid. And I said, well, why? Well, my doctor prescribed it. I said, well, have you tried cannabis? And they go, I can't do that. Well, why? It's a drug.
Yeah.
And I go,
irony.
Yeah, what do you think the opioid is? And they thought for a second. They go, yeah, I guess it's a drug, but my doctor prescribed it. I said, okay, so if your doctor said use this instead of that, would you do it? And they said, yeah. And I said, why? They said, because I trust my doctor. And that's as simple as a lot of people think. That's my trusted advisor. I go with what they have to say rather than doing their own research. So I really think that a lot of this stuff, especially when you look at new trends in real estate investing, like around opportunity zones, there again you find maybe the solution is in the medical device or the medical sciences side.
Yes, exactly. So opportunity zones, for people that don't know, and you could probably explain it better, but I heard about them on a podcast recently, is lower income zones where it's an opportunity for investors that if they don't want to pay taxes on their money, if they invest in these low income areas and they keep their money in there to help build up the area, then I forget if it's like after 10 years, they don't have to pay any taxes on the investment. Do you want to explain it further?
Yeah. So post the tax bill that passed this past year, they created a opportunity zone where you can go online and Google opportunity zones, and you'll see that they took across the whole nation. They zoned out all these different areas that if a business is located in that area and an investment is made in that geographical area, you get to defer a lot of the capital gains taxes. So this was designed for wealthy people who are having an exit or a liquidation event. They have a lot of this came from Silicon Valley, where people were having liquidation events when their companies went public. They have all this capital gain, and now what do they do to shelter it? So the idea was, hey, if you take this money you made, this gain, and you invest it into one of these opportunity zones, which are also lower demographic, more economically challenged areas, and it helps revitalize, then we'll give you these tax breaks. And the tax breaks are fairly complicated, but it is what it is. Now here's the trick. In the regs and in the writing of the rule, it states that money cannot get invested into a vice business, and that's the language they use. And they were very smart in using vice because that is pretty clear in most cases. It's kind of like the thing of when you say, it's like hard to describe pornography, but you know it when you see it.
Yeah, the sins. It's a sin, basically. Like alcohol, tobacco, strip clubs.
Yep, you got it. So from that aspect, it's hard to believe that cannabis, in its current form for recreational use, wouldn't fall in the scope of vice. However, what about something that's a cannabis business that's focused on medicine?
Exactly.
Now, is it a medical device company? Is it a medical business? If that's located in one of those zones, can you invest in that and get these same tax breaks? And it's all those kinds of things that'll start to get kind of challenged out in time as people try this stuff. But in my mind of thinking, that's where I say, okay, well, hey, if you want to enhance social equity, if you want to enhance inclusion, and you want to take some of the current trends that are there around these opportunity zones, then let's try and figure out a way to marriage the two because you have capital already being led to one and capital interested in another industry. So how do you, within the current writing of the rules, fit those in the right place? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it would be kind of like the reason I heard about opportunity zones is I listened to a podcast called Trump Inc. and they do a bunch of research about his past investments and things like that. And this one was about the Kushner family really taking advantage of opportunity zones. And it just struck me like it's kind of like social equity, but in land more or in businesses or whatever, not necessarily on the individuals, but it's on lower income areas that people need better opportunities. Or why don't we end up letting the wealthy people help lift up the other people and then everybody wins? And I think that it's important that the little people actually win. That was like obviously not the point. I really don't think the government ever does anything to benefit anyone except for their lobbyists. So, but it would be cool if we could play the game that they created by using an opportunity zone to do social equity and inclusivity somehow by keeping it medical and not recreational. And I think that would be like really cool to do and see how long we get away with it. Because that's what's the saying, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that's going to happen. When I look through history and I think about how generations have changed in their mindset, when I look at the baby boom generation and how the decisions that they made and the World War II generation before them, and then look at my generation as Gen X and the millennials behind me. And there's a significant shift when you look at those demographics from the way that the culture thinks about inclusion and accepting people from Gen X down. And if you think about just looking at how society has really changed the last 10 years and being way more accepting on a lot of different levels about sexuality and all kinds of things, it's hard for me to believe that we're not on a path of the big players out there, the people who really are making the money and getting more into decision making, both politics and in business, that this path of more inclusion isn't going to happen. I think we've hit the tipping point to some ways, maybe even to some fault, where, in some areas we might be getting a little wacky on the other side. But nonetheless, I really do believe that these generations and the cannabis industry, because of the root of the DNA that kind of runs through the really pure people, will make a difference as long as they stick around. I just hope they don't become like the action sports industry, where in the action sports industry you had a bunch of people who were real, about the soul of the business until they got tired. You do a business for 30 years and barely make ends meet for a long time. And then all of a sudden, you're in your 50s and somebody offers you a big check, you tend to take it because you're just so tired, right? And so, in the action sports industry, all the guys that really made the industry sold out at an age where they were looking, saying, "Hey, retirement's 10 years away. I got to take care of myself."
Yeah.
So as long as that doesn't happen here, which I don't think it will, because cannabis is a much larger industry that attracts a lot more capital. So it's just real important that we, people like you and I and others, keep drilling home for the new entrants into the business about, hey, don't let people lose touch with what this started about. Don't let a whole generation pass without understanding the importance of touching the plant and the nurturing that goes into it. And remember, it's a female plant, and so there's a female energy that has to be respected throughout that whole process in the industry. So I think within all that lies the solutions, and I do believe the people coming up are gonna help push that agenda.
I agree. I'm seeing just the blowback from Phylos. Growers are particularly independent and strong-willed people. They're not very cliquey. It's not like they have a huge support group of people because usually they just stay on their land and farm or whatever. But Phylos really brought the industry together on the cultivation side where they really woke up to the fact, like we all know that the big ag companies are going to come in. They've been coming in, they've been watching, they're waiting. We know this, but it took Phylos where everyone was like, wow, we really have to wake up. The key to inclusion is that us with a heart that want to see the heart and the culture live on is that we band together and we stay strong and we keep each other going because it's so competitive already. There's so much money in here and greed does some really horrible things to people. So it's important that we just keep fighting and recognize that I feel like it's us against them. It's the people from the industry that cared about it before it was ever legal, that made a lifestyle or a livelihood off of the plant, that we stick together and not get caught up by the money and, selling out so quickly because it's a very tempting thing to just sell out because it's already tiring. Anyone who goes into the legal industry is blown away with how much bullshit they have to deal with and the regulations and the continuous regulations changing and the costs of everything. Mm-hmm. It can really knock you down after a while. So community is important. That might be the only way we make it, inclusivity wise.
Well, let's wrap it up with this. You've got a great community. You've got good people that follow you. So anybody who's listened to this, let's just ask them to reply and make a note of what they would do and what they would like to see happen in order for us to accomplish what we're talking about in today's podcast.
I totally agree. Well, that was an awesome conversation. And like Kobe said, definitely reach out to me. The easiest way is on Instagram at Cannabis Pod. And let me know what you think. How can we keep inclusion in the industry? How do we keep the heart and soul in the industry when big money is coming in to buy us all out? And thank you so much for joining me. And thanks for tuning in. Colby, tell them where they can find you.
All right, so it's quiverfinancial.com is the business, and so that would be the easiest way to find us. Let's leave it at that.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, and we will be back soon with another awesome All Things Green episode.
All right, great, thanks.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast host. It really helps us get the truth out to a larger audience. You can follow us on Instagram at CannabiSPod and on LinkedIn at the Cannabis Detector. Show notes and links to articles referenced in this episode are available on our website, cannabispod.com. Is there a topic you want to hear, or do you have some BS you'd like to tell our audience? Send us a message on Instagram at CannabisPod. Stay skeptical.